Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to It's Rainmaking Time. This is Kim Greenhouse. How many of you have been frustrated, concerned about your children or your children's friends or family associates and friends and loved ones that have children and teenagers with ADHD? I've often heard rumors that you can solve this by having them eat proper food. They don't have to be on medication. It's a very complex area. And I thought we would invite Dr. Bob Myers, the author of Total Focus, a comprehensive program to improve attention, concentration, and self-control in children. Dr. Myers is a child psychologist, and he is also the assistant clinical professor of psychiatry and human behavior at UCIR in the School of Medicine. He is a psychologist who works with families, children, teenagers, and parents with learning disabilities and ADHD. It is imperative that we listen to him because someone with 25 years of experience in the area of human behavior like this has a vast contribution to make. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome Dr. Bob Myers to It's Rainmaking Time.
Thank you very much for having me.
I personally have to get out my own bias on this in order to make way for others who may have the bias I've had. There's been a lot of, bad rap in the medical industry about the number of children that have been put on Ritalin and other types of drugs in order to deal with this thing called ADHD. Now, I know that some may say it's propaganda, others may say people are just sensitive to the fact that their children and teenagers have had to be drugged, but apparently there's a lot of kids on Ritalin, and there's a lot of kids on drugs that really aren't doing them any good and are ineffective. Before we even go into that side of it, what is ADHD, and what does this have to do with our neurotransmitters in our brain? What is it?
Well, ADHD is referred to as a disorder. I kind of like to refer to it more as a difference, a brain difference. And we do know that in there are various numbers, 5%, 10%, somewhere in between there, of children and teenagers and adults who have Attention Deficit Hyperactivity Disorder, sometimes known as ADD, sometimes known as ADHD. Basically, we know that from various scientific studies, particularly recently with imaging and some genetic studies, that there definitely in these folks are decreases in the certain neurotransmitter receptors, particularly those related to dopamine and to a lesser extent perhaps norepinephrine. And those transmitters are running circuits in parts of the brain, particularly in the frontal lobes, that are associated with enabling a person to concentrate, to pay attention, to plan ahead. It also has functioning with kids, help with emotional regulation as well.
Why do you think it is that, since there's such a vast amount of children and teenagers who have ADD and ADHD, why isn't it that there isn't a more natural way to get them back to normal, so to speak, that baseline where everybody else is operating without drugs? Why can't we do it?
In some cases, it can be done. It depends. First of all, you need to be sure about the diagnosis, because just because someone has those symptoms doesn't necessarily mean that they have ADHD. So a really good workup is first going to look for medical causes. I mean, a few kids have these symptoms because they have low thyroid. A few have them because they have lead toxicity. A few of them have these symptoms because they may be allergic to a certain food substance. So those kinds of things. Some of them might have what are called absence seizures. So just for a start, those are some of the medical disorders that should be ruled out before you go ahead and give a diagnosis of ADHD.
But where do we go? Where do people take their children and their loved ones? What do they ask for in this workup? I think the details of this are very critical.
I think that I would recommend that parents start with their child's physician, their pediatrician, for the physical workup, and then ask their child's pediatrician or family doctor who in the community they trust to do the workup. Most likely it should be done by a child psychologist or a child psychiatrist, unless the pediatrician has some special training in ADHD, which some do, and learning disabilities, and they may do some of the assessment on their own. But one of the things that's often missed out, and I should have said another thing that can make a kid look like they have ADHD, is learning disabilities or specific learning disabilities. And if those aren't ruled out by testing by either a private psychologist or by the school district, you could be missing a lot, because 50% actually of kids with ADHD have learning disabilities along with the ADHD, and then there are other kids who may look like they're ADHD but only have learning disabilities. I used to get a lot of referrals from pediatricians, and we would always screen kids for learning disabilities, and sometimes it would turn out that they really didn't seem through all the testing and evaluation that they had ADHD, but they had some severe learning disabilities. If you're sitting in the classroom and you can't read, you will be staring around the room, you're going to be agitated, and you're going to look just like the ADHD kids. So it's really important to rule out all these comorbidities. Another one is I would see kids coming in for an evaluation for ADHD sitting in my waiting room bouncing all over the place, and I'd think, well, this is a slam dunk. It would turn out that they're super anxious kids. And so when we dealt with the anxiety, then those behaviors went away. So it's really important to not rush in to the diagnosis, but to rule out medical and other psychological possible causes before making that diagnosis. And I think often, people will say, is it overdiagnosed? I would say that it's overdiagnosed and underdiagnosed.
So it's a paradox.
Yes, it is. And so some kids who have ADHD, particularly when it's what we call the inattentive type, those kids kind of get passed over and struggle in school for years because they're not the kids that are causing the behavior problems. The kids who have the behavior problems and are driving the teachers nuts often are the ones that are quickly diagnosed with ADHD when there's probably something else that's really the cause of it.
Now, you talked about in the total focus some of these distinctions, and you talked about oppositional defiance disorder. What does that mean, really? That someone's a rebel when they're young, or they're just in a defiant place? What is that?
Yeah, it has to do probably a lot with the temperament of that child. Some kids, along the temperamental traits, the way they line up on those would be judged to be easy to raise. Some of them are more difficult to raise. And so if you, by the luck of the draw through the genetic pool, get a kid with the temperamental traits that are on the difficult to raise side,